So today I'm here to talk about my least favorite / worst books that I read during 2020. I don't have too many of these, and I actually think that this is my first time doing a worst books of the year video. I've talked before about like some books that I've disliked, but I've never had enough books to make a whole video about it at the end of the year, but here we go. Today I do. I'm gonna divide them into two categories. One category being like they were bad, and the other category being they just weren't for me. So it's kind of like the worst books and then my least favorite books. But as always, these are just my opinions. You came here to my channel for my opinion. Here's my opinion on some books. If you disagree with me, that's totally fine. I'm more than happy for you that you enjoyed these books that I didn't. So I'm gonna start out with my least favorite section, just to kind of soften things a little bit until I get to the worst books that I read. So these are only fiction books. Also, I will have a nonfiction book video coming out soon. I know not everyone is like the hugest fan of reading nonfiction, so I'm gonna have a separate video talking about all the nonfiction books that I read during 2020 and like which ones I'd recommend and which ones I wouldn't. But for now, we're just talking about the fiction ones. So most of these books I gave a 3-star rating. I don't think it's like actively bad, but it just wasn't for me, so it's not gonna get a higher rating than that. If it was just based purely on enjoyment, not on quality of the book, all of these books would be rated 2-star, but just because I know objectively they're not bad, they're a 3-star rating for me. Now, most of these books are going to be a little bit controversial because they are much loved in the book community, especially in the YA community. And the first one I have to talk about is The Winter's Curse by Marie Rutkoski. This is following a girl who's from like the noble class. Her father is like a very high-ranking general. Her kingdom has enslaved another kingdom, and she ends up purchasing this slave, but feels like this very like love at first sight attraction to him. I just did not like anything about this book. In my opinion, there was just nothing going on for it other than the romance, which I didn't understand at all. They spent barely any time together the whole book. She showed little to no interest in him. He showed little to no interest in her, yet they were supposed to be so attracted to each other, but I just did not get that at all. I'm like, why are these two a couple? The world may never know. I'm sure in later books it talks more about it, but just from this first book, it was very unbelievable to me that these two would be a couple. They didn't seem to have anything in common. They didn't seem to like really mesh well. They didn't seem to get along really well. I don't know why they were a couple, basically. So just not in my personal taste, not for me, not my kind of romance. If you're going into this thinking it's gonna be like a very cool like fantasy series, the fantasy is not the focus of this. The focus is definitely the romance and the world building and the plot. It gets kind of thrown to the wayside. Next, I have Poison Study by Marie V. Snyder, and this one is a difficult one because I really loved the premise of this. This is following a girl who is slated for execution. She's in prison, and she gets pulled out to become the king's taste tester to basically make sure there's no poison in his food. They want to make sure that they have somebody whose life is like so invaluable for this position, because obviously if somebody is trying to poison the king, she's gonna get killed instead. And I really liked that premise, but everything was just meh. It was fine. The plot was okay. The characters were okay. The world building was okay. Nothing really stood out. It was very predictable. Literally from like the first or second chapter, I was like, oh, this is where it's going, and that's exactly what happened. So that was kind of disappointing to me. I also really did not like the romance in this book. Well, not that I didn't like the romance. I actually did like the pairing, so I thought that was a good pairing between the two, but I didn't like how you spent the whole book having no romantic interest, no relationship. It was like barely any conversations between the two of these people. Then towards the end, the author wanted to rush and make a romance happen, so the very last bit she's like, oh, here's a romance, and you're like, what happened? Why was this not presented earlier on? I would have much rather a really gradual slow burn romance throughout this, and it would have improved the book so much. I don't think I'm going to continue on with the series because I just didn't really think it was anything super special. The next one I want to talk about is Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angelis. This was a debut book this year, so I don't want to go too hard on it, and I definitely think this falls under the category of just not for me. I think that if you are part of the target audience for this book, I think you probably would really enjoy it, but I'm just not part of the target audience, so it wasn't written for me, and Therefore, I can't really fault it too much for not enjoying it. And that's not to say I did enjoy it. I really liked Janella Angelis's writing style, so it was very lush and vivid and depictions of all these crazy magic scenes and different things like that, and I really did enjoy that. So I would be interested in picking up more books from her later on, but as far as the development of this book goes, pretty much everything left a little bit to be desired for me. So like the characters, the world building, the plot, I just needed a little bit more structure to it. It felt a little bit weak in the technical areas of developing a fantasy. So that's why it ended up on this list. But if you don't know what this is following a world where there's this like big magician's competition. It's following a girl who escapes from kind of a bad situation out on her journey as she wants to compete and win this magician's competition. I was really wanting to love this one because I really enjoyed Caraval, and I've been looking for another like circusy-esque book. And there is a circus in this too, but I wish it got more attention. I kind of just didn't really like this one very much. Then last up on my just not for me list, I have Followers by Megan Angelo. And this book was just an overall meh for me also. This is following a dual timeline between 2015 and 2051, and it's basically a commentary on social media addiction and celebrity and how that can affect a person. And I think it was very successful in that, in making the reader think about those different things. I think it was successful, but everything else surrounding it was just kind of bland to me. There was no spice, there was no flavor. I wasn't really drawn in by any of the characters or the drama that was happening. I didn't care about any of it. The plot line was just kind of like, meh. I just didn't really enjoy it. So there's not really anything else to say about it. I don't think it was bad. I think a lot of people would find a lot of meaning in this book. Like I said, I thought the commentary was interesting, but everything else just was not entertaining to me. I would rather watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix. Now for the books that I just thought were kind of bad. First one being The Falconer by Elizabeth May. I know this is a very popular one, and I am sorry for any fans out there, but I just did not like this book. I thought that it was very unsuccessful in what it was trying to do. So this is following a girl who is a fairy hunter, and after the death of her mother, she has a very like intense hatred for fairies, and she's like out for revenge against them, but she's also in like, I think it's the 1800s Scotland, and so she's also trying to be like a proper lady during the day, and then at nighttime she's like out fairy hunting. There was just so much that this book could have done better. First off, being the dialogue sounded like American English, and I know the author is American, so I think that's probably why. Every once in a while there'd be like an I thrown in there to like make you remember that this is set in Scotland, but just the way that everyone is speaking, it was written in American English, so it was kind of difficult to really like immerse yourself in Scotland when everyone just sounded like they were American. There's definite ways to write an accent into a book, and this didn't even really try at all. This also just seemed like we were missing something. It almost felt to me like this was the second book in the series, and I just started in and I missed like this whole backstory. They constantly kept spending time referring back to past events that weren't in the book, and I just wish you would have started the book at an earlier point in the plot and it would have solved this whole issue. If it would have started at the girl discovering her mother dying, that would have been such a better plot, and it would have added so much character growth. A lot of things just seemed unbelievable about the main character. She had this intense bloodlust for hunting the fairies, but it was so unbelievable that I just couldn't deal with it, and I think if you would have started the book earlier, that would have solved that issue. There's also like these inventions that this girl's making that seemed so cheesy, a la Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Like that's what it reminded me of, and I hated it. I did not like that. Like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is good for like a kid's movie. I loved that movie growing up, but with this book it just didn't work, and I just did not like it. I will not be continuing on with the series, that's for sure. Next up, I've got I'll Never Tell by Catherine Mackenzie. This is an adult mystery thriller following a summer camp that is owned by this family, and the parents die, so now all the kids have to come back to the summer camp and try to sort out the estate. But a long time ago, while they were all teenagers, or young people at least, a girl was attacked at their summer camp, and they never figured out who did it. So they all kind of have suspicions of each other, and they're trying to figure out which person did it before settling the estate. Now, I loved the setting for this one. The lakeside summer camp, just such a good setting for a mystery thriller, and I really hope I can find another one that has a similar setting that I actually enjoy, because this one just did not do it for me. I thought the setup for the mystery was really good, and I was like, oh yeah, who did this? And I really liked the flashbacks and stuff. Like the start to this book was strong, but just from there it just went downhill for me. I hated the way the mystery progressed, because it seemed like each person was constantly finger pointing at another person, like, you did it, then you did it, now you did it, now you did it, until it got to the point where there was literally like one person left. And I'm like, come on, it's just so ridiculous. There was no suspense or anything surrounding it, because it was just constantly like, I know who did it, it was you because of X, Y, and Z. And then the next scene it was like, you did it because of this. And I just couldn't stand that. And then the ending was so bad. It was eye roll worthy. It was eye roll worthy. I just sat there and I was like, really? Like, this is how you're gonna end this book? So overly dramatic. I couldn't handle it, and just not for me. I don't know if I'd pick up another book by Katherine Mackenzie or not. I still am on the fence about it a little bit. I guess it would depend if I heard good things about it, or if it was another setting that appealed to me. I might try another one of her books and just hope that this was very individual to this particular release. Now I have to talk about King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. I am sorry, you guys. I love Leigh Bardugo as much as the next girl, but this book was just not it. I don't know what happened with this book. It seemed like she took long enough time to like really work on it and stuff, and there wasn't any like writing things that were bad, but just the story was just like not great. I really think that they pitched this all wrong, and I think that contributed a lot to the negative reviews. First of all, this is a continuation of Shadow and Bone. People are saying like, oh, it's its own series. It's not. It's Shadow and Bone number 4. There's no way. I mean, you could do this, but in my opinion, there's no way to fully understand and appreciate this story unless you've read Shadow and Bone. So in that way, it is Shadow and Bone number 4. It's not its own thing like Six of Crows. Like Six of Crows you could read by itself and not miss out on anything. This book, you cannot read it on its own unless you've read the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And for that matter, you have to read Six of Crows too. I don't know why anybody should read this without reading all the other Grishaverse books first, because they would completely spoil themselves so bad. But as far as the book itself, I just didn't like it overall. I thought it was bad. I thought it was badly done. I thought that the character development was just all wonky. Like, there was such potential for Nikolai character development, and he just felt so bland. And I don't know how that is, because Nikolai is like one of the characters that really jumps off the page in Shadow and Bone. And this book, he just like faded into the background, and I know it was because he was like struggling with problems that he's dealing with, but I felt like there's a way to do that in a dimensional and make your really come across as a struggle, but it just felt like boring to me. Also, Nina's perspective is included in this, and I don't know why she is here. Like, the whole time I was reading it, I'm like, why are we hearing from Nina? She has nothing to say about this storyline with Nikolai. I'm sure in the next book it's gonna all tie together, but I just felt it was so unnecessary. Like, she could have just come in the next book, and I would have much rather gotten some more character development from Nikolai than I would have kept hearing from Nina in this plot line that has no place really in this particular plot line. I do like Nina's story, but it had no business being in this book. So I unfortunately did not like this one. I probably still will read the second one just to see if it gets any better. Unless this next one gets bad reviews too, then I'll just skip it, but don't really like this one, and I do not recommend reading this unless you've read all the other Grisha books, because you will 100% spoil yourself for some really like pivotal moments and like end of the book cliffhangers if you read this before reading those other ones. Next up is a sad one for me, and that is Fate of the Fallen by Kel Cade. This book just missed the mark. There is so much that I really did like about this book. This is a twist on the chosen one trope. So basically there's 2 boys in a village, they're growing up, and one of them is like obviously the chosen one of the story, and that's like no secret. But he ends up dying, and the other one, who's like the sidekick, has to take over the adventure for the chosen one. And I thought that was such a cool premise for the book and such a cool pitch. But man, this book just did not do it for me. There was so much I didn't like. The author was trying to have this be like a funny, witty, quirky little book, but it just came off as kind of silly and made the dialogue so awkward, and it almost felt like very scripted. None of the conversations felt like a natural conversation. It just felt very like theater reading from a script, and it just wasn't good. There was a lot of character switching perspectives, and for a 300-page book, you really need to be sticking to like 1 or 2 characters at maximum in order to get the proper development, and this just totally lacked that one, like completely lacked any development. There was all sorts of scenes where I'm like, oh my gosh, like some action, like let's see what happens here, and it would just be like done in a breeze, over so fast that you couldn't really sink into any of the scenes. It just felt like we were just going. It felt like there was a really cool movie playing and I just like drove by so fast that I couldn't see any of the scenes. Like that's what it really felt like. I wish this would have been longer. It would have been much more developed, and I wish they would have taken more time on edits and really refining this down, and I think it could have been great, but it just missed the mark so much for me, and I don't think I'll be picking up more by Kel Cade because of this, which is sad for me because there's not very many female authors in the fantasy realm, and I really wanted to love this, but it just was a miss for me. If you're looking for a book that is actually funny, a fantasy book that's actually funny, pick up Kings of the Wild because it is much better. Then finally, we have my most hated book of the year, and I don't say that lightly. This is my most hated book, and that is Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. I am horrified at the fact that this was like a young teenager's popular book in the 90s. Appalling to me that anybody would let their 13-year-old or younger read this book. The parents must not have read this, and it is shocking to me that it is still considered to be like a classic book in the YA genre, because, or in the YA age range, because this has no business being a kid's book. This is following a mother whose husband dies, and she has all these little kids. She has, I think, 4 kids, 2 older ones and then 2 younger ones, and she's now basically destitute because she doesn't have a husband. This is set in the 50s. And at the time, you know, it's hard for women to find work. So she decides that she's going to move back with her parents who have disowned her. And she basically has to hide her kids in her family's house because she doesn't want her dad knowing that she has any kids for a very specific reason. And the mom helps to hide the kids in this room, and they have access to go up to the attic. The grandmother is very abusive to the kids. It romanticizes incest and abuse. Like, it is bad. And I mean, I think there's sometimes that topics need to be discussed in a book, like things that are not comfortable. This just romanticized abuse and everything so horribly. And while I will say it was compulsively readable, like I did finish it, it was just a constant, like, disgusting cringe moment to me the whole time I was reading it. I felt so gross by the end of the book. I could not handle it. I do not recommend anybody read this book. This was also the only book that I've given 1 star in so long. I don't even know the last time I gave out a 1 star, but here we go. 1 star to Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. Well guys, that was all my least favorite books of the year. If you want to see me talk about books that I actually liked, make sure to check up there. I have my most favorite books of the year already posted, so you guys can see some good recommendations from me now that you got some bad ones and books to avoid. Go check out that one and get some recommendations. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to like it down below and subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me in the future, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!